we now need to add hidden inputs for each value that needs to be saved. And when we're over here, well, let's go ahead and look over here. And you can see we have our cookie clicker application. And when you look at it, you want to think to yourself, what data do I need to save, right? So do I need to save the number of cookies that the user has accumulated? Yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Do I need to save the cookies per second that they have earned? Yeah, that sounds like a good idea too. Do I need to save the cost of the cursor? Well, not necessarily. Okay, you could, but it would make things just a little bit more complicated because you'd have to send more data to the PHP file. All you really need to know for the cursor or for any of these buildings is how many you own, because our algorithm is set up so that for every one that you own, we are multiplying the base cost of the cursor, which is 15. We're multiplying that by a number. I think it's 1.2, right? So if we own 47 of them, we could simply program on the PHP side, we can program it to multiply 15 by how many you own, 47, to get this number 78996, right? If you own 3, we would multiply the number 15 by 1.2 3 times to get the cost, the current cost of the cursor. Yeah, so that's what we need. We need how many cursors you own. We need to know how many grandmas you own, how many farms you own, and so on. Okay. So one thing that you need to understand is if a form wants to send data from the website to the PHP file, that form needs to have an input, right? So if we're over here, right, when I hit submit, what happens? It takes this data that I entered in and it sends it over to the PHP file along with the password that I entered in, and then the PHP file takes that and checks the database and sees if everything is correct, and if it is, then it sends me to this web page, right? So when we're over here and we want to save this data, right, via the save button, or maybe it's easier to show you here. We want to send all this data via the save button, right? Well, this save button doesn't have a place where I can enter in the number of cookies per second, or I can enter in the number of cookies or how many cursors I own. But what we can do is we can create hidden inputs that will take the value of the number of cookies they have, the number of cookies per second they've earned, and all of the other data that we need. Okay. But one thing you need to remember is for each piece of data that we want to send to the PHP file, when we hit the save button, we need to add a hidden input to the save button. All right. So that's what we're going to do now. We're over here. We have our form right here that we've made, right? It's empty at the moment, and we're going to fill it up with hidden inputs. And how do we do that? Well, we can just type this in. And let me make it bigger for you so you can see what's going on. Okay, so what do we have here? We have our input, class full width. We don't really need that. We could say type hidden. That means it's not going to be shown to the user. And then we want to set our ID so that our JavaScript file can have access to this input. That's going to be very important for later. And then we need to have our name, cookies. Why? Because the name signifies the type of post or the index of the post variable where this data is going to be stored, right? So when we hit submit, when we're in the cookie save.php, this data here is going to be saved in post cookies. Okay. Right now we're going to set the value of this input to 0. But don't worry about that. We're going to use JavaScript to change this value to the number of cookies that have accumulated, right? When we hit the submit button. So we don't really need to know about that too much right now. But what you do need to do is you need to add hidden inputs for every piece of data that you want to send from the web application to the server. Okay, so make sure that all the types are hidden. Of course, you want to change the name, so we're going to say n CPS, the number of CPSs. We're going to call it CPS, value 0. Okay. You're going to do the same thing for every other piece of data, the number of cursors, the number of grandmas, the number of farms, and so on. Okay. You just want to make sure that you're changing the ID name, because IDs do need to be unique, and you're changing the name of the input. So why don't you go ahead and get that done.